Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me here on Mount Benson, Vancouver Island, British Columbia. A special thank you to Chris Lipp and the team for pulling together such an adventurous group. Love the wide range of wilderness expertise and perspective. The grandeur of our natural world has a huge draw on people. And I think you'll agree that in order to play and work in this environment takes some physical depth and self-sufficiency, but especially true when we're called on to assist others in wilderness and wilderness emergencies. So I've chosen 3 areas of physical capacity that will increase our effectiveness doing this. The first is aerobic endurance, second is strength and power, and the third is tissue resilience. We'll also be looking at how to gain these and some specifics around what to do. So, looking forward to our time together. Let's get started. So why these 3 areas? Well, the wild has a way of challenging us, and often unpredictably, we push to go far, to go hard, and to go long. To go far requires prolonged effort with minimal stress. At least that's the idea. We accomplish that aerobically with a fat-adapted high aerobic output, self-fueling system. In contrast, to be strong on demand requires a certain intensity of pushing, pulling, lifting, carrying, and climbing. And that whole thing then depends on toughness. That's tissue resilience, mechanical thresholds for tension and pressure. These 3 areas define your ability to do your job well. So generally, how do we best approach developing these aspects of performance? Blaise Dubois, founder of the Running Clinic organization in Quebec, has wonderfully illustrated the how. I call this paradigm performance adaptation, and it defines, governs, and accomplishes development on an elite level. If you leave with one concept to anchor your physical training in, this is it: performance adaptation and the adaptive zone. The stylized graph shows the context. So the horizontal axis is a span of time. It can vary with training activity and exposures shown by that undulating blue peaked line, expressing amounts of physical stress and load along the up or vertical axis. So it's pretty simple but profound. Note the red line, referred to as the maximal stress quantity, or MSQ. This defines the top threshold for successful effort. And key word there is successful, not effort. The green line indicates the minimal amount of stress or load exerted on a system or structure, below which minimal to no positive adaptation occurs. So what's our goal? Well, it's to keep our training efforts between the red and the green, and that's in the adaptive zone. Rest and recovery at or below the green. Note how over time with activities, if you watch that graph to the right, successfully focused in the adaptive zone, the whole zone gradually rises, and higher MSQs are safely possible, as well as the recovery at the bottom by the green occurring while still at a higher output. Slide 2 shows the maladaptation or misadaptation occurring when training or eventing are done above the MSQ. And that's the red line. This leads to decreased physical capacity, often resulting in injury. The adaptive zone is subsequently driven lower, as you can see, and many of us have in the past and still do train commonly in this scenario number 2. It's what we push for as opposed to performance adaptation. I call this damage and repair. The old U.S. Marine recruiting slogan of pain is weakness leaving your body, what a concept, although simple and false, is culturally entrenched in much of adventure athletics. And the problem with this approach becomes very clear as we age. With repeated exposure to the maladaptation or that damage and repair cycle, you get permanent changes in tissue fibrosis, arthrosis, and general degeneration. Evidence of superseding your MSQ manifests in 3 simple ways. Number 1, damage or pain during the activity. Number 2, pain afterwards. And number 3, pain or soreness 1 to 2 days later. These are all most likely indications of tissue damage, and they require repair. The 24 to 48 hour negative sensations that a lot of us get or refer to as delayed onset of muscle soreness or DOMS is actually tissue damage. It is not metabolite buildup or lactic acid accumulation, or here's a good one, signs of a really good workout. It's damage. Micro tears cause vascular trauma, fibrinogen, fibrin release, cortisol, and brain opioid pain modulation release. All these things form plaques and are indications that you have breached your MSQ. Not good things. Note to self, always train in my adaptive zone. So now that we've spent some time looking at the adaptive zone and the performance adaptation model, let's go back to the 3 areas that we had talked about earlier, and we're going to investigate a bit further. For optimal endurance, we want to become fat adapted and aerobically superior. We do that by limiting our carbohydrate ingestion and by doing most of our training at our aerobic threshold. Lowering carbohydrates reduces the blood glucose and limits insulin, also releases glucagon, which then helps our muscles to bias toward using fat and ketones as a fuel of choice. Also want to limit the amount of sweet stuff that we use during and post workouts, because that highly interferes with the fat as a fuel. Also helps bias our metabolic enzymes away from the 400 or 500 grams of stored glycogen that we have for the 2 hours of activity, and gives us 10 times that if we are fat adapted. Aerobic capacity rises with training exertions at a level that is at or just below your aerobic threshold. Generally, that means 180 beats minus your age plus or minus 5 beats. And that gives you, surprisingly accurately, your aerobic threshold target. Now, if you're using heart rate monitors, which is the best way to do that, you'll want to use a chest one, because the wrist heart rate monitors are often misleading and they're quite delayed, and it's really hard to measure output that way. If you don't have a heart rate monitor, one of the ways of doing it is to count 10 seconds without having to take another breath while you're doing the activity. So that would be 1 and 2 and all the way to 10, not having to breathe or try it. It's actually a very neat way of testing out. Also, the obvious one is the talk test, being able to talk normally, similar to the way I'm talking now, but I'm still going up a mountain. So at that point, I am in my aerobic threshold. if you involve as much of your body as you can at the time, you're going to get more comprehensive vascularization and activating the aerobic metabolism generally in your body. So running, road and trail, mountaineering, extended multi-pitch climbs, biking, swimming, paddling, snowshoeing, Nordic and backcountry skiing, they all depend on a deep aerobic base. So you want 80 to 90% of your training volume at your aerobic threshold. And for a lot of us, that's ridiculously slow, but it's hugely powerful in making you an aerobic machine. Most of us train too hard, and we forego the benefits of all that change, all that beautiful enzymatic change that gets us to where we want to be. If you do it this way, you will literally become bonk-proof. You become a bonk-proof adventurer, you'll keep your cortisol low, your stress optimal, and your injuries at a minimum. That's an awesome thing. And here's the magic of that. The other 10%, so the other leftover amount of training, is done at a very high intensity. Super high intensity, 20 to 40 seconds. That's all, not a long time, of sprint style full out workouts. Should have about 4 to 8 repeats with full recovery. That's resting heart rate pretty well. A recovery in between these efforts are not long enough to stimulate cortisol. While they do dramatically increase testosterone and brain-derived neurotrophic factor and growth hormone, most recreational athletes, they spend too long and too often above their aerobic threshold and actually miss that beautiful 10% portion of intensity. Results from this approach to prolong cortisol and insulin release drive down the testosterone, which is something we don't want, and limits fat metabolism. We want to build an aerobic base of at least 10 weeks. So that's not going above or beyond your aerobic threshold for at least 10 weeks. I usually do a 10-month aerobic base build before you attempt the intensity workouts. As well, obviously, you want a good 10 to 20 minute warm-up and cool down around those sessions. Once you've started the intensity microcycles, they occur roughly in a 4-week periodization, and you'll do 1 or 2 of those a week. Make sure that they're not semi-difficult, but that they're an all-out hammer, because that's where the magic is. That's where the gold is. If you can add those two, those will be a huge help. So now that you're an aerobic beast, let's briefly touch on strength and power. Healthy strong is not built by damaging muscle and healing it stronger. Workout intensities are best guided by the adaptive zone, below the red and above the green. 2 ways combine to help you know this intensity of choice. Number 1, intuitive progressions, and number 2, our friend MSQ breaching awareness. Pain during, pain after, pain a day or 2 later. Intuitive progressions build on a prior proven ability of roughly 4 to 6 weeks. This is combined with a confidence in the activities, technical requirements, movement form, and anticipated loads. Furthermore, the absolute key to successful adaptive process is adequate, rich recovery. mixed with the performance adapting intensities. Draw as much of the body structure into each dynamic repetition as possible. Keep reps between 5 to 15, 2 to 3 sets with intensities around failure -1 to 3. Strength exercise variations abound. The premise, though, is the same: to make efforts count without overly high reps or over or under loading. When technique or form diminish, the value goes with it. Relevant, comprehensive warm-ups, obviously, and cool-downs are crucial for safe strength and power training. And stay in your adaptive zone. No damage and repair. That gives you the kind of strength you need for the intensity and the unpredictable moments where you have to dig deep. And finally, we come to tissue resilience. Material toughness manifests against tensile and compressive forces. These capacities are calibrated in all cell types, a threshold for being pulled apart and being impacted. The osteomyofascial matrix, bone, muscle, tendon, ligament, fascia, connective tissue, insertion sites, transition sites, hyaline cartilage, not to mention the nervous system, central, peripheral, and autonomic, all are affected and require resilience. The wilderness adventure and rescuer needs this kind of performance adaptation. Jarring, ballistic loading, and impact are all essential. Think about activities that have these vital components, and sparing ourselves from them will cost us. Structures such as plantar fascia, metatarsal heads, Achilles tendons, patellofemoral tendons, cartilage, medial menisci, joint ligaments, bursa, spinal components, rotator cuff structures. The list goes on. No jarring, no ballistics, no resilience equals increased injury risk, decreased capacity, and long-term degeneration. That's right. It's not impact and tension that wears out structures. It's a lack of performance adaptation change and resilience. The overload principle is important, but does not suggest force beyond your MSQ. It means loading more as you are able after MSQ rises and adaptive zones increase. You know what? It's snowing, and it doesn't normally, doesn't snow much on Vancouver Island. And that brings us to the end and the top of our time together. Go and become the best adventurer and the best rescuer you can be. Work on your aerobics, work on your strength, and work on that resilience, all within the adaptive zone. Have a great weekend.